My name is Beth Davis, and I'm the Southern Piedmont Chapter co-chair, along with Lisa Tompkins, who is here with us today. So thank you, Lisa. We're glad you're here. Thank you to Laura Domingo as our host, and Grace, who is also here helping us today, and Craig Maxwell for our IT specialty. Thank you. We are very grateful to Clint Brooks for putting together a program about fire. And I think it's good. He is a natural resources supervisor with Mecklenburg County. And he manages a crew who remove invasive species, facilitate prescribed fire, and monitor species of concern. And so we are really looking forward to hearing all about how important fire is to the plants that we enjoy. So Clint, thank you very much.
Thank you. How are y'all doing today? Good. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit today about Mecklenburg County and the Prescribe fire program, where it began, what is involved, what it has evolved into today, and sort of why we do what we do in terms of Prescribe fire. A little bit about me. So I grew up in eastern Mecklenburg County, right on the Cabarrus County line. I grew up on a farm. I was in the woods all the time, hunting, fishing, farming. That's what we did, livestock, row crops, the whole 9 yards. So that's what I grew up doing, and still do that to this day, just not in Mecklenburg County. But to go with that, that's sort of set the foundation to my interest in natural resource management. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what kind of sort of gave me the foundation to get involved in understanding plants and systems and all that stuff. Ironically, my father grew up, he for his profession is a firefighter and does a lot of sprinkler work. So he spent, I laugh, and my brother's a forester, but I laugh, my dad spent his whole career trying to put fire out, and I'm spending my whole career lighting it. So that's kind of where we are today. So the first time that my father ever held a drip torch, I wish you could have seen his face. He was scared to death. But you know, he understands a little bit better now. But talking about Mecklenburg County and talking about the fires here, a lot of times, you know, we see fire, and you know, it can seem kind of scary in a lot of instances, especially in a setting in Mecklenburg County, in Charlotte, where we have, you know, there's a statistic here in a little bit, 1.1 million people in Mecklenburg County. So the thought of using fire as a tool for managing our natural resources is a little daunting. Do we have fires that look like this? Yep, this is one of our fires in one of our prairie settings. And that's two of our personnel you can see there in the yellow fire equipment. Those flame heights are, you know, 20, some places 30 foot high, and a lot of our, you know, prairie settings where we have a lot of fuels and grasses and stuff like that. So fire does look like this, and it sounds like a freight train when it's running through, but 90% of the time it looks like this. So you can walk over it. It's kind of anticlimactic. You know, you put in all the legwork and you have this slow backing fire that is consuming small amounts of fuel, and seems like it's not a whole lot happening. But the benefits, no doubt, are still there. But talking a little bit about the program here again, the history of fire here in this area, and I'm not an expert here, but just knowing kind of where things have come and some of the writings and stuff like that of what fire was in this region of the Carolinas in the last couple hundred years. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then the program here, how did the program here in Mecklenburg County start? When did it start? And what did it look like then versus what it looks like now, and what's some of the difference? And then just talking a little bit about logistics of our burn program. As I talk about what it looks like then versus now, I think it's pretty important to see how we use fire here in Mecklenburg County to manage native plants, invasive species, and just all the legwork that goes into place to be able to pull these burns off. And then, lastly, why do we use prescribed fire? Like I said, we're in one of the most populated cities or counties in the entire state, and possibly the Southeast. Why are we still using fire here? And that's sort of the answer there, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. So why prescribed fire? The history of fire, is a part of this system. Hundreds of years ago, indigenous people, burned the Piedmont region especially, and even the coastal plains to manage, mainly for hunting grounds. They weren't thinking about native plants, and they weren't thinking about, succession stages and nothing like that. They were using it for managing their hunting grounds. And what came by using fire lended itself to set the plate for a beautiful ecosystem. So again, using it to manage their hunting lands was one of the primary drivers for why they use fire in this. And one of the things that I didn't put in here is also you have lightning strikes and stuff like that. But a lot of the fire that was used in this area was used by indigenous people. And because of the use of fire, based on the rotations that were used over, thousands of years, it led to, diverse ecosystem and open landscape of grasses and with the, larger stage of trees. They gave it that savanna look. So some of the early observations, John Lawson, many of you may be familiar with Voyage to New Carolina. This is just one of many of the explorers that talked about, the grand savanna being here in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, and having that sparse tree density with good grass abundance, wildflowers, and plenty of wildlife to support. So again, large clusters of trees with open floor and an abundance of grasses in the understory. And bison were plentiful here. So, and some of the tree species that were prevalent in this system, again, were oak, hickory, and pine, which lend themselves to be, being able to handle the pressure from fire, especially on the, annual or biannual or, 3 to 5 year burn rotation. So those were the system, the trees that were supported by that system. And again, going back to indigenous people, and Native Americans and how they used fire, a lot of that thought was, using fire to manage their hunting grounds and using fire to hunt. There's several indications and writings talking about how Indians used prescribed fire actually to drive bison off of cliffs and ridges, and have a pile of bison at the bottom that they would use and harvest. So again, using fire to hunt led to a byproduct of the ecosystem that was there. So again, quite crazy to think about, but it was used quite often for that. So why fire? Why here and why now? So, we're not hunting buffalo anymore here in the Piedmont. So why are we still using fire? We have equipment to manage the landscape, like mowing, and you see a lot of the power line right of ways for chipping and handling woody debris. So why are we still using fire? And we have herbicide to maintain those areas as well, so we can use herbicide to keep from burning and all that stuff. So why burn? Well, the benefits of prescribed fire, there's numerous. Nutrient cycling is one. So being able to take the old and recycle it into new growth, essentially fertilizer for plants that are going to resprout. Species diversity. So again, clearing the landscape to allow new seeds to sprout. and come in. Gives a greater diversity, especially depending on how long or short that burn rotation may be. And for us here in Mecklenburg County, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, one of the #1 reasons we use prescribed fire is invasive species control. If you go into any of our preserves here in Mecklenburg County and look around, Elaeagnus or autumn olive is the bane of our existence. Some birders love it and appreciate it because of the fruit that it bears, but it is probably our #1 impedance when it comes to natural resource management here in Mecklenburg County. It is the greatest landscape level invasive that we have, and it is that species in particular is the one that influences our prescribed fire regiments overall. It creates what we call fire shadows, so it gets so dense that it almost has a microclimate underneath its canopy. So even when fire is intense enough, it will sort of hit those pockets of Elaeagnus and will almost extinguish. And the Elaeagnus lives, and it keeps that going. So we have to get into different management techniques to get those larger shrubs down to be manageable to use fire in those systems. So managing invasive species is critical. Other invasive species, kudzu, privet, all those other things. Fire does help us from a landscape level manage that a little bit more easier. It allows us access to higher density pockets to where we can use chemical and mowing and all those other things to try to manage that. Fuel reduction. So talking about population here in Mecklenburg County being 1.1 million people, fuel reduction is one of the #1 drivers when we're thinking, besides invasive species control, endangered species. We have several burn units that, the burn unit is within, a couple of 100 yards of housing developments and stuff like that. So being on top of our game in terms of setting up those management plans and understanding why we're using fire in those settings is crucial. So using fuel reduction as a point to let people understand that, we're not burning just for endangered species and invasive species and helping manage those things. We're also, trying to prevent wildfire instances throughout the county. Cost, and cost, what do I mean by cost? Cost of, everything above. So by, using prescribed fire and having a prescribed fire management, a system as a, management tool in our toolbox, we can reduce costs, which is ultimately taxpayer dollars, in terms of managing species diversity, invasive species, and all those other things within our nature preserves within the county. So kind of what drives our fire program? Well, I'll just hit on that a little bit, but endangered species like swine-nut sunflower. We have numerous preserves that have, swine-nut sunflower present, especially in our prairie settings that we manage annually, especially in those prairies. They are pretty intense systems. A lot of our prairie settings are burned on a 1 to 2 year rotation. Several years ago, we were trying to do a dormant season fire, and then we would try to burn 18 months later in the growing season, and it sort of got us out of schedule, because sometimes when growing season fire would come, we wouldn't have the right weather or whatever, so things would then get bumped to a 3 year rotation. And in those prairie settings, trees can take hold quickly and change the system drastically, thus impacting those native endangered plants. So now in our prairie settings, we're burning either annually or every 2 years, typically, to make sure that we're keeping a good grass component and the woody species to a minimum. Oak regeneration. We're actually working on a project now, natural resources section, and we're doing some oak studies and looking at a lot of different overlays and trying to determine what our oak regeneration looks like within Mecklenburg County. Reaching that climax for system, oak hickory type system based on the soil types that we is present. So we know within the last couple hundred years that was farmed and cleared land. And now a lot of those places have sweet gum and, early successional plants, tulip poplar and stuff that haven't turned over yet. And we're surveying those certain areas to see, are we seeing any oak regeneration coming into the system to help the prolonged health of that, stand for that climax for us. Again, invasive species. This is Elaeagnus autumnale. Again, the bane of my existence is trying to manage this. It's just it's a game changer for us, as I mentioned before. Interesting note. Some of you may know. So back in, I think it was the 40s, 50s, 60s, the Wildlife Commission here in North Carolina actually published an article or advertising saying plant autumn olive, Russian olive, another species to help support wildlife diversity and food, being the berries, and mainly talking about bird species that would be benefiting from autumn olive. So we can see where the advertising worked well here in Mecklenburg County. So it is here in prevalence. So and this is a picture here near McDowell Nature Preserve. This here is, this is kind of, we talk about oak savanna or grand savanna, kind of a sort of a snapshot of, I guess in my mind, maybe what some of the early arrivals saw, back in the 1600s that have documented. Of course, the indigenous people lived through this and had this and created this type of system, but large canopy of oaks clustered with nice grasses in the understory that provided plenty of habitat for many of species. So that oak hickory type open savanna setup. Native, birds, managing stuff for wildlife. That's another driver. And then again, lastly, wildfire potentials here. Do we have the fuel systems to be like California? Not right now. We're not as volatile as they are. But as more and more people come here and systems change and climate's changing, all this stuff changes. Who knows what the system might be like in another 20, 30, 50, 100 years. So trying to work now to manage those fuel areas in our preserves is important for that. So again, going back to some of the points that I just hit on there. Again, this is, as of this year, a little over 1.1 million people in Mecklenburg County and growing almost daily. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our fire program now here in Mecklenburg County. It has come a long way in a very short period of time, relatively. The fire program here, it began in the early 90s, like 93, 94, I believe. We'll see. No, it was 92, I believe, is when the natural resources section was sort of in its infancy, and that's where it was mainly like park ranger type educator setup. There was not a dedicated natural resource management staff, even though the people who were hired, and matter of fact, the last gentleman who was here from the very beginning to what it is today just retired. So it's been 30 years, but when they were hired, those were biologists and ecologists, wildlife biologists, foresters who were hired in the beginning, and built the ground, built it from the ground up. So again, it started in the mid to late 90s as far as the burning started. And then active burn plans, what we'll talk about here in a little bit, the actually writing of a burn plan and a prescription, that didn't come to develop until the early 2000s. So, roughly 20 years ago. The first burn focused around habitat improvement and developing logistics. Of course, the idea was, using fire in the system on a consistent basis to gain all those benefits we just talked about. But really more importantly was developing logistics, understanding here in Mecklenburg County, how we're going to communicate our message of using prescribed fire in a positive setting in a very populated county. So that was what a lot of the beginning of it looked like. And I give you a little bit of a background. The average unit size back then was around 1 to 2 acres was the average burn unit size in the mid to late 90s. And a lot of these areas were just open fields that were, as the county bought land, was old hay land or farmland that just started, burning these easy pieces that were just 1 and 2 acre sizes that were mainly in the northern part of the county, up around Latta Nature Preserve, Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge, and all that. So around 1 to 2 acres is what the average unit was. And today, our average unit size is about 90 acres. So the average unit is, almost 100 times bigger than what it was then. And back then, I think they were burning somewhere just on an annual basis in the very first couple of years, 10 to 20 acres. And now we're burning, like last year, we had 1,200 acres on the map. And then we've got, again, we're like 12 to 1,300 acres again this year on the map. So it's grown, a lot in the last, 30 years. So it was lots of legwork to develop communication across numerous entities, working with so many partners to try to understand what we were trying to do in terms of, managing native species and managing invasive species and all that. And then just using simplicity, the factor of simplicity in the beginning, because it was so small, making sure we were maintaining simple burn units that could be effective and that were safe, so that we could try to pass the message that fire in the right conditions can be a safe tactic for managing that. Talking a little bit about now, this picture here is at Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge. If any of you have ever been there, to the very end, the wildlife viewing stand, looking out across the ponds. Those are nice grassland, and that's one of those 30-foot flames that we see in those grass areas. But now a lot of the same principles as in the past, but the goals are essentially the same, but yet different at the same time. Because we're managing that many more acres, we have a lot of different things to take into consideration when we're writing our burn plans. Then, we were just burning little grass areas, but now we've added in and incorporated woodland units and understanding burn rotations in those woodland units as compared to just grassland units. Understanding invasive species plans that are overlapped with burn plans, that are overlapped with timber management plans, and understanding how, we all come to the table with, specific goals and how to meet those different goals. And that's what helps develop our burn plan with that. So it's not just, let's just out there and burn that. It's taking into consideration all those different things. Biggest difference though is people. The county, like I said, has grown astronomically in the last 30 years, and will continue to grow. So that's going to be a little bit difficult to manage. But I do want to talk a little bit about a closer closer look at what happens on burn day to make these things happen. A lot of planning. Communicating is crucial. We have a lot of areas that we are very visible when we burn. If many of you have ever been to McDowell Nature Preserve in the south end of the county, right at the corner of Shopton Road and 49 is what used to be called Dodge City Prairie. It's still there, but we have so many logistic nightmares trying to manage that area with fire. It's probably one of the busiest corners in South Charlotte. And just a few years ago, we pulled off a burn, but it was unbelievable what went into it to pull it off. So burning here compared to somewhere else, there's still tons of logistics involved to make sure that everyone is safe at the end of the day. Everyone goes home at the end of the day. But here we have a lot more things that we have to communicate, and we'll talk about that stuff now. Burn plans. So here are our burn plans that I work on and create. And on these burn plans, this is just one page, and it's usually a 2-page document. Every unit has a burn plan, and these burn plans are outlined, and it tells us, where it is, location, telephone numbers, what is the purpose of the burn, how many tonnage of fuel is there, what wind we need to do to burn there, when it was previously burned, and then it has a call list, and then the tools we need, special instructions, and then we have team assignments. All these different factors, come into effect just to create, a safe burn environment for us. And you can see, all of this stuff comes into effect, but without the weather coming to be, we can't do anything. So weather is probably our #1 driver on burn day decisions. So this, looking at burn weather kind of comes into it. We're taking that into consideration sometimes as much as a week out, thinking about, we already have our burn units selected for that year, and thinking about time since rain, what type of fuel systems we have set in place, what is our wind direction, all that stuff comes into consideration. Wind direction is probably our most important, aspect when we're looking at our weather parameters, just because of where our house is at from here, 485 from here. Even though our smoke is going to go high, when the wind sets it back down, where is it going to set it down back at? So all that comes into effect when we're thinking about these burn plans. And being here the last 5 or 6 years, I'll tell you, each year it gets a little bit harder because the maps change every year in terms of, there's a strip mall there that's just north of us now. There's a housing development that's there now. All those things come into considerations when writing those burn plans. Those things are sort of out of our control, so we have to do the best we can when writing them. So these burn plans are critical when it comes to making sure that we're pulling off an effective burn. And here's a picture of one of our maps. This is just a random burn unit. This is actually at Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge. If any of you are familiar with the Holly Bend house, the Holly Bend house is actually at the very top of the screen there. So this unit is just south of that along the Catawba River. This is a forest in sand burn, but I just wanted to kind of show you sort of what our basic map looks like. And this is just kind of highlighting the red is our burn unit, and then the black is our roads, and just a rough map of showing kind of what things look like on a map for us and how we plan out, wind direction and team decisions and assignments and all of that stuff. So notifications. This is, as a burn boss, it starts early in the morning, and the burn boss a lot of times you think is the man at the front out there doing all the burning. a lot of times he or she is the one that's behind the scenes, pulling all of this stuff together, making all of these things come together. For anybody else in the state, this is probably not that big of a deal, but for us, it is our number one thing that we have to make sure that we maintain, is our notifications. So so Mecklenburg County, as you can imagine, is non-compliant for air quality. So we have to work closely with air quality, Charlotte Air Quality, and they can pretty much, when you're watching the news and it says it's an orange day or whatever, based on that, they can shut us down. So we have to meet their credentials first. We have to work with the fire marshal. Those two work closely together. But ultimately, we get our yes or no from the fire marshal, and that comes from the city of Charlotte, and he is county-wide fire marshal, and he makes the decisions on whether we can do that or not based on the parameters that he has worked with. The fire marshal's office is great. We've in the last 5 to 10 years, we have had to work with the fire marshal to understand and educate and work together on understanding what the purposes, of our burns are, because a lot of the fire marshal's office pretty much historically is handling structure fires. So when we have a good burn day, they think good burn day, they think good burn day for houses too, and it's like, well, maybe so, but when we see a 10-mile-an-hour wind, we're excited. We're like, we've got something to work with. And they're like, whoa, 10-mile-an-hour winds. And we're like, I'd take a 20 if I could get it. But working with them and trying to bridge the gap on communicating, what we need to make effective burns, not dangerous burns, but effective burns out in the field, as compared to, what has been taught in their mind from a structural standpoint. But we've made great strides on that. And but anyway, they're one of the people that we have to deal with, notifying Charlotte Fire. So we have to call Charlotte Fire headquarters, let them know, give them all the parameters of where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, and all of that. So they're another one on the list. EMS, again, letting them know, calling them, communicating. Forest Service. So we have to call their operations room, and we have to call local Forest Service agents and let them know that we're going to be doing prescribed burn in the area, and they may actually come out with us and check some things out. This is a new one. Last year, I was burn bossing a prescribed burn up in the northern part of the county at Cowen Wildlife Refuge. And it was a big unit. We were burning it was like 150 acres. We kind of joined 2 units together, and we were trying to get some things done because it was getting pinched for the season. And my phone rings and I look at it. I didn't recognize the number, and I thought, well, burn day, let me answer. And I answer, and it says, hey, Clint, this is such and such with the FAA at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. And I thought, yes, sir. How can I help you? And he's like, yeah, I understand you're doing a prescribed burn at Cowen Ford today. I said, I am. He's like, yeah, we're having some trouble landing planes because of your smoke. So that's a new element. So they're now added to our burn plans for notifications of people to call on burn day. So I would imagine there's not many other burn programs that have to call the FAA to let them know what's going on, but that's another call on our list. Local neighbors. So we have a lot of smoke sensitive neighbors. So we work closely with our neighbors surrounding nature reserves that we use active fire at, and making sure that if anybody has asthma or any type of respiratory issues, anything like that, that we let them know that, possibly be doing a prescribed burn today. And if so, if they have another option to go to the mall for a couple of hours or go visit or something like that, I just try to give some notifications to those neighbors to do so. Local police department. So a lot of times Huntersville the police department, Matthews, all those police departments, let all those local police guys know what's going on in case they get any calls. Even though Charlotte Fire and EMS when somebody dials 911, that's who it's going to. Still communicating with that local police department is critical for helping us to make sure that we're open communication on what's going on. And then any other special requests on the burn plan. So we have people all the time who are in the area who, want to know because of their dogs or all this different reasons. So if we get a call and they want to be added to that burn plan, to be notified if they're within, a 10-mile area of that preserve, then we have to make sure that we let them know. Recently, in the last probably 5 or 6 years, some of you may have it on your phone, called Everbridge, or your phone may automatically have it, but you can actually sign up for notifications, and it's a reverse 911 system. So we actually go in now, once we call all of these people and let them know what we're doing, we go in and based on where our burn unit is, we'll go in and we draw a map or a cone based on our smoke predictions of where smoke's going to go, and we can draw a cone, of where our smoke is going to be. And then that system will actually go in for anyone who is signed up for the white pages, yellow pages, or those notifications, and it will reverse 911. It'll call them or take whatever their preferences are and say, Mecklenburg County Department of Natural Resources is doing a prescribed burn today at such and such nature preserve. There may be smoke in the area and all that stuff. Using that reverse 911 system has been huge for helping us in terms of getting notifications out and letting the public know what's happening on an instantaneous basis. And we run those out the morning of burn. That way there's several hours before any smoke actually hits the area. So, and then just kind of following up with the day of burn stuff, we now have 11 person staff that currently helps prepare for the day. Back in the early 90s, there was 2 people. So there's big difference in what's going on. So now we have a lot of hands on deck that can sort of help us put these things together to make this stuff happen. A lot of that stuff is, getting signs out, fuel, ATV, drip torches, radios, maps, waters, keys, plans, the list goes on. And if we don't have everything, we've been on a burn before, as crazy as it sounds, we get all this stuff ready, we get out there and everybody forgot their lighter. So we don't even have fire to start the fire. So making sure everything on that burn list is in place is critical, not only to make the fire happen, but to make sure it's safe and effective. Again, this is one of our signs. This is like a typical roadway construction sign, but it says Prescribe Burn. We used to have some signs that said, and we still have a couple that say smoke ahead. A couple of teenagers stole those, as you can imagine why. But so we try to notify everybody we can with that. And then lastly, I want to go through a little bit, a few pictures from the fire line. And there's 4, 5, 6 pictures here. Let's kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing and kind of highlighting some of the stuff that we've talked about here. Looking here, this is, some of you may know, in the northern part of the county. This is Gar Creek Nature Preserve. This is where a population of Schwannet sunflower is. Actually, this Carcinite, this orange sign in the foreground right on the side of the road is a do not mow sign, no trespassing, because the Schwannet's population is right there alongside the road. But as you can see, there's some prairie opening with some of that open savanna, oak, hickory, pine in the background, of course, with the active fire going. But mainly what I wanted to highlight here is talking about managing those native species, especially a lot of times in our prairie settings. And you can see right where we're at, right next to a highway. So being in an urban setting, managing all those different things, there's a lot of complexities to make that stuff happen. So we have to constantly have staff and trucks on the road to make sure that we are visible for people to know that what's happening is safe and monitored. Despite all of that, even having signs out and being visible, we've had people who are on the road and they pull up next to us and they see a fire and they are on the phone with 911, even after we tell them that this is a prescribed burn. So it'll be like that forever, but that's just one of the complexities of where we are. But anyway, there's that. This is a picture that was sent to one of our staff off of Snapchat or something like that. They were in downtown Charlotte and they sent this to one of our staff and they said, "Is this because of you?" And we were actually burning in the north. This is up near Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge at Rural Hill Nature Preserve, which is about a 140-acre burn unit. There's some nice pine, open pine, savanna-like timber. We were burning there and they saw the smoke that day. So we're getting famous. This is Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge. Some of you have been there to the viewing stand. It doesn't look this way no more. So the steam plant is gone. That was the River Bend steam plant. So that is no longer there. So this is a historic photo, if you will. But you can see the active fire working in the foreground. Again, just across the river from a major power plant. So again, one of those communication things that we have to make sure stay in place. This is from an airplane. This is that same burn unit that we just saw right here. This is it post fire. So the steam plant is just across the river there. And we had, I can't remember who this was, who had an airplane, and one of our staff got to go up and check out the burn unit post burn. And you can see the ridge top, what's around the pond, and as it drops to the river, still stayed pretty green, but what is blacked out was mostly ridge top, good grasses, excellent prairie type setting. We've got to do this several times. One of the best resources is Charlotte Police Department with the CMPD. We've got to work with them and actually go up in their helicopter. We've done some logging operations as well as post-fire stuff, and they've been able to take us up in the helicopter and see it from the air. So another good resource for managing those resources. This here is just a picture of some open grassland area burning. It's kind of washed out on the screen here. But this was a pretty intense burn last year. This was at Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge. And a lot of these grasses were 8-10 foot tall, and a lot of these flames were every bit of 20 and 30 foot in height. Again, those grassland areas are very flashy. They're very, they make a lot of flame and a lot of noise, and it can seem quite daunting. Which brings me to the next point is, you have a lot of staff that, even though we're trained, some have differences of experience that can, create different, comfort levels on the fire line. So making sure everybody is safe when they're on the fire line, and understanding your different roles on the fire line is critical to make sure everybody goes home safe at night. Because a lot of times being, some of us, you can be right on the fire and you're cool and you're fine, but other people don't. So it just making sure understanding, again, as a burn boss, when you're writing those plans, putting the right team members at the right places is critical. Again, so this is in a woodland setting. This is oak hickory type setup. And one thing I want to talk to you about this picture. So our burn windows are, most of our burn season generally, for the most part, begins after Christmas. And that's just because of some logistics, because we host deer hunts as well, and during the month of November, so we're busy with that. And more importantly, the fuels have not cured out enough to provide good enough, burn, usually until January, and as we get into February. So a lot of our burn season happens in a very short and intense time, and that burn window is usually January to March. Those 3 months, we are hitting it pretty hard to try to get those 1,200 acres, and that's a big year. On average, it's 600 or so, half of that, but we're playing catch up from years past because of poor weather. But this is a nice day in February, and you can see the fire behavior here. A lot of the times, we're running strips through the woods, and it's a pretty low intensity fire. We don't want anything that is too crazy, because the idea here is a fuel reduction, so that we can provide beneficial life for new sprouting species, and also get rid of some of the finer shrubs and stuff like that. And again, some of these places are right next to houses, so we don't want super intense fires. And then, lastly, we don't want super intense fires because we're not trying to replace the canopy up above. We're just trying to maintain that mid to low story canopy. Another grassland unit, I believe this is at Latta. This is the Prairie at Latta Nature Reserve. Some of you may have been there. Schwannett sunflower here as well. Again, you can see the intensity here as compared to what those grassland and prairie units can be. Here, it takes hours. Sometimes you wish you had 30-mile-an-hour winds to make it go faster because it's so slow. And then, these prairies, and here you can see one of our staff, he's actually has the drip torch over and is walking and is constantly pouring fuel out. Whereas here, you're putting one spot down and you're walking quite a ways and then putting one spot down. So understanding those firing techniques in these areas makes a difference too. But just the intensity across the two is totally different. Anyway, so that's all I have. I'll be happy to take any questions. But when I was making this PowerPoint, I was kind of thinking about our program, and we have a lot of science behind our fire program and what we do in terms of why we do what we do. And we've done studies with invasive species and wildlife monitoring projects and stuff like that. I didn't put any of that stuff in there because there's a lot of science in that, but understanding why fire is so important here in the county to us, for managing those native areas, fire is so crucial, especially from us. For taxpayer benefit is the cost. We save a lot of money by being able to use fire on the system because we can manage 100+ acres, in a day, as compared to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on crew members with chainsaws and herbicide and mowing contracts and all that stuff. And we still have to do that because we don't get to burn every acre in Mecklenburg County. But it is very beneficial to us. And I was just talking about total acres burned. So on average, we're burning 500 to 1,200 acres in a day or in a year, usually. In Mecklenburg County Park System, there's roughly 8,000 acres of land, and we only get to burn, that much a year. And there's some places that don't ever get burned, like here at Reedy Creek and some of those inner city places. And why that is because essentially the city limits keep us from that. The density of people around and stuff like that, like here at Reedy Creek especially, there is a lot of nice places here at Reedy Creek that would benefit from using Prescribe fire, but because of how close it is to highways and houses and schools, we can't do it. We have done some demo burns that are, the size of a couple car parking spaces, just to kind of exhibit post-fire behavior and regeneration stuff. But for the most part, of the 8,000 acres, we may burn 2,500 acres in all out of that 8,000 acres. But in that gives us a huge benefit in terms of, native species abundance, especially Swanet's sunflower and Georgia aster, counting those sunflowers and Georgia aster every year, and, watching those populations, stabilize and actually increase over time is quite beneficial. So, but anything, yes, sir.
Can you list some of the prairie species, plants that you see that might be indicator species for you that things are doing well? And do you, over the years you've been doing this, monitor them, which plants are increasing in numbers based on the fire?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so the question is, in the prairie systems specifically, what benefits are we seeing from fire? And what species do we see as beneficial to our fire program, essentially? A lot of what we're, in these prairie settings, we have areas that we have some mitigation populations of Schwanett sunflower and Georgia aster that we're required to monitor forever. So a lot of times these prairie areas, what drove the prairie area was the Schwanett sunflower. So, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Maybe both, but it helps us, the fire helps with those Schwanetts and Georgia aster populations especially. And in these areas like Latta and McDowell Nature Preserve, and Schwanett sunflowers, the populations have dramatically increased. Last year, there was actually a little bit of a reduction. Last year was a high abundance, and then this year was a reduced number. Yet nothing has changed in our fire program or, mowing contracts. So we're kind of puzzled at what happened there. So another element we take into, like Gar Creek, is being right next to the highway. We're dealing with DOT constantly mowing and spraying, so we don't know if we're having issues there. We constantly are dealing with Duke Power, which manages all the right-of-ways, and we have several populations on power line right-of-ways that we notice populations dwindle or go down dramatically post herbicide treatment. So working with partners like Duke Power to make sure that they understand when their crews come through that they know where those populations are. But as far as species that we look for in those prairie areas, the biggest thing with prairie populations is making sure that we have fuels present. They're going to give us productive and effective burns. And so what I mean by that is making sure that we have a good grass component in that system, because that grass component carries that fire. We don't need grass so thick that, of course, it's not beneficial to wildlife and being able to move, but thin enough also to allow that movement. But things like big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, those grasses provide good quality standing habitat for all species, but also gives us the fuel that it needs to maintain a productive fire. And again, just going back from those units that we're burning annually and biannually, we're seeing those endangered species populations stabilize, if not increase, over time. Yes, ma'am.
So when you burn a site, what's the rotation of another burn? You said annually or biannually. Is it more time than that, or it just depends?
Yes, ma'am. So it depends, but in a couple of different settings. So our prairie areas, mostly those early successional prairie areas, especially where there's endangered species, there for a while, we were burning things on an 18-month schedule. So that would be a dormant season burn, and then we would wait 18 months, and then it would be a growing season burn. And the idea behind the growing season fire is that it's a lot different. Your fire is less intense, but it's supposed to, in theory, manage woody species much better. So reducing those woody stems, yet still providing, the benefits to all the other herbaceous and grasses. Problem with that goes back to where we are here in Mecklenburg County. We're non-compliant for air quality. So that 18-month burn in the summer months would often be an orange code day. So all those other things would be good, but the fire marshal or air quality would come back and say code orange, where you're not burning. So over the course of several years, we were noticing we were missing that 18th month burn. So what would happen is we would skip that 18-month burn, would never happen. So then it would go to the next dormant season. So then that unit is, instead of getting an 18-month burn, it's now doubled, and it's a 3-year burn rotation. So those prairie areas, would go from nice grass, herbaceous, all those endangered species. And then we would notice all of a sudden when we come to burn again, now we have a red bud population, we have sweet gum population, all these woody species start creeping in, start creating fire shadows. And we were having to spend a whole lot of time with mechanical treatment to manage those areas back down to where we could get a fire intense enough to run through. So that leads me back to it. So now most of those areas are on a 1-year rotation, unless we get to a point where we're noticing after 1 year, we're coming back and say, we don't have quite enough fuel, or the fuels haven't rebounded as much, or if we notice a population of something is not coming back in an annual term, then we bump it to a 2-year rotation. But in most of those grass settings, it will not go longer than 2 years. And if the weather is poor or whatever it is, and we don't get to it after 2 years, we will mow it. We will do some type of disturbance to make sure that we're keeping it at that successional stage. So, and I forgot the other part of your question. Okay.
That's good, thank you.
But yeah, so that's the biggest thing. And in terms, and then, like our woodland units, we're kind of going back and forth. I was talking about our oak regeneration study that we're in the infancy of doing it right now, but we're trying to develop a survey metric now to understand sort of where our forests are. And in that helps to develop, it scratches my brain all the time. I'm like, so how should our burn rotations be set up? Because we have a lot of areas that are, they are heavy with poplar and sweet gum, but there's the occasional white oak and red oak in those systems. And it's like, well, to progress the system, a little bit faster, should we be burning that quicker? Should we burn that on a 5-year rotation instead of a 10-year to try to knock some of those non-fire dominant species out of the system to allow those oaks to come into the system? So that helps sort of develop our schedules as well. But we don't have a single unit that goes longer than 10 years. And even at a 10-year rotation, you never even know there was a fire. If you come back after 5 years, you can almost tell that you don't know that there was a fire there.
If you take the map of that number, what's the percentage of the burn area?
Yes, ma'am. Yep. So the northern region and the most southern region is where that happens. So McDowell Nature Preserve in the south, and then in the north. So in the north, probably is 65% of our burn units, and then the other 35% is down in the south at McDowell. And everything else, we have burn units on the map, but we're working through the Forest Service to try to get mitigation burns done. And mitigation burns, meaning that, hey, they say we can't burn it because of it's in city limits, so we can get grant money from Forest Service, and we can do a joint cooperation burn to pull those things off. But up in the north, we have Cowen's Ford Wildlife Refuge, Latta Nature Reserve, what is now Buckeye Cove. It used to be Stevens Road Nature Preserve. Let's see, I'm trying to think, there's another Rural Hill Nature Preserve. Those are the main 4 or 5 there, and then the other being at McDowell.
Can you briefly explain mitigation site?
Yeah, so as far as mitigation burning,
What is mitigation?
yeah,
How does that relate to what you're doing?
yeah, so, well, I'll start with mitigation sites as far as the endangered species stuff. So there were some sites that in the early days, Mecklenburg County picked up some endangered species like Schweinitz and Georgia aster, where construction was going on in other phases of the county or surrounding counties, and to help the county sort of expand on, propagating these endangered species and trying to help increase those numbers. Mecklenburg County often caught some of those, transplants of plants that were coming from different construction sites and roadway sites and all of that stuff. So that's how a lot of these prairie areas sort of have kept their hold, is because we've got to maintain those because of those mitigation populations of Schweinitz sunflowers. As far as mitigation burning goes, that's working through the Forest Service, and there's a special program called the Stevens Act, and it's pretty much, mitigation dollars that get set into a pool, and that money it goes through a grant funding system that ranks certain properties based on wildfire potential. So those are wildfire potential strictly. So we have properties that even we don't feel comfortable burning because it's right next to Charlotte Douglas International Airport, or a major highway, or major housing development. Shuffletown, Prairie is, small little Prairie near Ross's Ferry Road. It's got Schweinitz and Georgia aster on it, and there's 200 houses literally on the property line of Shuffletown Nature Reserve, and we have burned it through a joint co-op of the Forest Service. And once we got done doing it, the Forest Service said, I don't know that we'll be able to do this one again. Even they were nervous about it. So, so those mitigation areas, those mitigation burns are working on properties that are just super, super high visibility, both from roadway standpoint, air control standpoint, and housing developments probably being number one. So trying to get fire into those areas is quite tough. So,
are there any plans in the future for small demo burns in residential sections and do some on just little, but I want to individual citizens to do that.
Yep. So within Mecklenburg County, so my job specifically, outside of county property, we can assist, I guess, possibly. It depends on, what our director may say, since it's fire, may say, we don't want to, just because of liability and insurance. And it's another huge thing, is our liability and insurance is huge. Each one of us has a prescribed fire number, and we have so much training that we have to do to be able to burn boss and sign off on these plans. And sometimes signing your name on that form can be daunting. But as far as doing demo burns, just right out here on the side of the road coming in, there's some small grass areas that have been used as demo burns before, and there's a demo area at McDowell Nature Preserve as well as Latta Nature Preserve. And it just kind of depends. The guy before me, he sort of started some of that, but the last several years have been kind of crazy in terms of our units and trying to get them in a short window, just because of weather, has been our biggest issue. So, that's why our units have gone up so much. Even in the last couple of years, they've gone from, average of 50 acres to 75 to 100 acres, just because we're trying to burn more acres in a single day to make sure we're meeting our objectives. So trying to find that balance to get into certain areas to do those demo burns has been tough for us the last couple of years. But with that said, as before last year, we didn't have but 6 staff. Now we have 11. So we've essentially doubled, which has allowed us, hopefully, now we can start running 2 teams is our plan. So before we were running single team burn days. So now our plan is to run 2 teams so we can get twice as many acres theoretically in a given day, so that we can try to get more acres on the map. So hopefully, for educational purposes especially, to do demo burns is in the works.
Is burning an effective control of microstegia?
Microstegium. Yes and no. Microstegium loves fire. It loves fire. So if you burn it in the dormant season, when the skeletons are there, after a frost, it sounds like a prairie burn. I mean, it is popping and it roars, but there's a nice flush carpet the subsequent growing season. So burning it in the dormant season, not so much. And because it's an annual thing, you would almost have to burn it every single year to get to where you're catching up with the seed bank. And would you ever catch up with it? Probably.
So how do you guys control for it?
So a lot of times, and well, let me back up. So some of our units have it. It's usually in a lower areas, wetter areas and stuff like that. And if we burn it during our invasive species plan, kind of overlaps, and we've developed it to help this, but we'll burn in the dormant season, and that next growing season, we're coming back in now that we have more staff and we have an invasive species plan, that we come in and do post-burn treatment of invasives. So Iliagnus, privet, kudzu, the whole shebang, including microstegium. So if we come into an area and we notice we have a microstegia problem, even though we burned it, we come back through and we treat that microstegium and try to get it out of the system. Still, microstegium is such a good cedar that sometimes it takes years to get it out of the system. On a small scale, something the size of this room, summertime treatment, I don't know if many of you seen like the weed torch, that works. It'll kill it, but how long has that microstegium been there before, may impact your management, because you think, oh, I killed it, and then the next growing season it's back, because there's 15 years of seed bank sitting there waiting on it. We found that using typical Roundup rates are 3 to 4% in a mix, using 0.5% or 1% in a mix we won't kill anything else really. We've noticed, especially spraying woody stuff, it will not kill that woody stuff, but that microstegium will die slowly, and it's been very effective at managing microstegium, especially in our woodland areas. In our open areas like prairies and stuff like that, we usually don't have any problems with it. One thing we do notice, like Rural Hill, where I was talking about, that pine savanna area, where the girl sent the picture of, is this you? That area there had microstegium because it's a peninsula out into the Catawba River. And we've seen microstegium over the last several years. It's still there, but it's reducing in numbers. One, because we've thinned it through a logging operation and have it on a burn rotation. So as abundance of native forbs and other plants come into the system, we see that it sort of diminishes over time. So, but it's a tough one. It is a very tough one. So just because it seeds annually.
Craig, did you have any comment?
No, nothing online, no.
What about Johnson grass?
Johnson grass, we don't have, we've had a couple places where Johnson grass is an issue. And most of the time when Johnson grass is an issue, it's an old ag site. So where we inherited what used to be a farmer's field or whatever it may be from 100 years ago, we see Johnson grass coming into the system. And the way we've managed it is summertime going in, and we have like what we call a wick bar, and it's just like a wet bar, and it has a Johnson grass specific herbicide or even Roundup. And Johnson grass being so much higher than the others, we can drive the tractor over without spraying anything else, and it will just wipe it, and that contact will kill just the Johnson grass.
I thought I've heard that growing season burn might help with that too, because that's a cool, more of a cool season grass right then there.
It's a warm season.
warm.
It is a warm season grass.
This rhizome is tough.
It's very tough. Yeah.
Get rid of Johnson grass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. And you know, especially, you know, these prairie settings, and you know, that's the thing, you know, about these prairie settings is it's a pretty harsh environment. And that's, you know, when we think about, and, you know, we talk about this all the time amongst different employees at work, you know, we're talking back and forth, and it's like, you know, you think about these prairies and savannas over the course of time, those are some rough and tough places. They're hot, they're dry, they're open, you know, they're rocky soils. Fire was through them all the time, animals graze through them all the time. So a lot of times, even like around our, you know, endangered species, we try to like be soft and stuff. And next thing you know, you find out that, you know, some guy was running off the road from Texton. Now you got ruts through your prairie. Next thing you know, you got swine that's coming up in your ruts, and you're like, I don't understand, you know. So, you know, understanding that, you know, plays a big difference. But those prairies are a little bit tough to manage because the stuff that can survive out there is tough.
Well, yeah, Johnson grass. I live in, my neighborhood is the Mineral Springs Barren.
Yep.
So it's dry. Yeah,
Right.
I know exactly.
Yep.
Disturbance is so important. That's what buffalo were.
That's right.
You've been over by buffalo very much.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And you know, that's one of the things that, you know, I personally, I say a lot about work is especially in these prairie areas, we have a lot of trouble, like when we're developing those burn rotations, as you were asking, saying, okay, well, how do we develop these burn rotations to meet the goal of diversity and endangered species, invasive species? How do we develop that? Because, you know, the old science says, well, you know, there was only fire based on fire rings in this tree stump. Fire was only here every 4 to 5 years. And it's like, well, if you let it go 4 to 5 years now, the way things are now, you know, you're gonna have a forest on your hands. But the one element that we forget about is that disturbance of millions of buffalo and grazing across you know, as soon as post fire would come, the following spring, they were grazing through and managing that down, and that disturbance was huge for managing all those grassland areas. Made a big difference. And that's, you know, one of the things in our prairie areas and a lot of these areas that were sweet gum heavy, or, you know, you're starting to get a lot of woody stuff coming in, is we would burn through, and then that following that burn, you know, just before green up, we would come through and take the tractor and we would mow as well. So mow down any woodies that didn't seem that they got impacted by that fire. The drastic difference just mowing made, and adding grass back into that system is huge.
Well,
So
the buffalo grazed on more grass than forage.
that's correct.
And they're gone now.
They're gone. Yep. But just the hoof action alone, really, and the fertilizer. Yep. That's exactly right. So, made a big difference.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating. There's been a number of questions.
Thank you so
We
much.
really appreciate it. So we're going to sign off on Zoom now, but we do encourage you to check the website and sign up for our hikes that are coming up. And we have two that I can call out, Red Lair, and we're going to, Laura's taking us to Latta. So those are two places to see Schweinis's sunflower, I believe. So please look for those and some of the many others. So thank you everyone for joining us.